First up on the list is Dr. Wendy Chung, and she unfortunately could not make it, but very graciously recorded a video just for the KCNH1 community. And since she's not here, I can hype her up a little bit. She's kind of a celebrity in the rare disease world. I think she's one of the few people in this space that I actually had heard of before Tristan was born because of her involvement with a famous Supreme Court case. And she is one of the handful of doctors in the world who has a KCNH1 patient. And it was thanks to her and Noreen gathering a bunch of info from a bunch of the families that got Dr. George on board and led to some really important research. So I'm very pleased to share her message to us all.
Hi, my name's Wendy Chung. I'm a medical geneticist and physician scientist at Columbia University. I'm going to talk to you today about some of the things I've learned about rare genetic conditions and how family groups have worked together with scientists and doctors to be able to move forward towards treatment. I have called this treatment, and this is an acronym for thinking about targeted research and exploration to advance clinical models, editing, and next-generation therapies. So trying to think about a roadmap of what you all can do together to advance the field and advance the cause for your children and your family members. The first that you have already done is gotten a diagnosis, and that's the most important first step, is to understand the club you're a part of, KCNH1. In a good way, from my point of view, this is an area of medicine that's relatively understood. That is a channel. And you're going to hear from researchers today who are world-class experts in studying channels. And from my perspective, there's a deep expertise and knowledge in knowing how to be able to modify the function of channels using medications in particular. So it just so happens, although you didn't do it by choice, that you ended up in a club that I think is a good club to be part of. So that's the first thing that you've done. The next thing is to find others who are like you, who are members of the same club, and stick together. You really need, the numbers are small because it's a rare condition and these are early days. There are many more of you out there than you realize, so do stick together and aggregate. Try not to splinter. As you're doing it, it becomes really important, I think, about a model of what I call the care until the cure. And thinking about the care, we need to learn from each other. We need to learn from just the things that we've tried by trial and error and figure out what things worked and what things didn't, and be able to disseminate that to other families, to other doctors, so that we can do a little bit less of the trial and error and get to hopefully some evidence that can guide what might be best practices in terms of thinking about this for the future. As you're thinking about moving toward the day when there would be clinical trials of treatments, it's important, and just trust me on this, to be able to have baseline data so that to know what things are like now, to be able to compare to when we try something new, a treatment in the future, a new experimental treatment, a clinical trial, to be able to minimize the number of people who have to be randomized to placebo or not do anything, and to allow for really robust data gathering. We want to have each person be their own control and know what they're like now so that we can see what happens if they start a new treatment, if things get better, if things get worse, but we need that comparison. Within this, we need to be able to understand what it is that we might see change. We need to look at those outcomes, whether the change is something that we see by looking at EEGs or electrical activity in the brain, whether there are other standardized outcome measures in particular that folks like the FDA would approve a medication for. We need to really do the practice part of things now, that exploration and being able to see that. Within this, there are going to be many researchers who will not necessarily be working on your channel on KCNH1, but you want to be able to de-risk it, to make it as easy as possible for researchers who might have good ideas about new treatments, new therapies, new ways to understand channel function, to be able to invite them and make it easy for them to do research and essentially work for you. What I'd say is, to do that, you may want to develop as a group resources that help them do their work. This includes cells or cell lines from some of your individuals in the community, maybe mouse models, maybe what we call organoids or mini brains for them to study, but things to make it as easy as possible. As they're doing that, and again, you're going to hear from some of the best experts in the field today, there are data now to understand how the channel is functioning, and that's critical to be able to think about how to correct problems with the way it's functioning. So this is already work in progress, and trust me, you've got some of the best experts working on this already. In thinking about what that mechanism is for how the channels are not doing their job properly will help inform then what the best therapeutic strategies are, whether or not there are going to be certain classes of small molecules that'll be useful, whether there'll be other methods of genetic manipulation, what I call molecular methods, really critical to understand the mechanism and potentially reversibility. That is, whether or not this can be, the problems can be reversed or made better, or whether we just stay status quo and stable and prevent things from getting worse. But that's part of what we do in the preclinical era. So especially if they're animal models, mouse models are what we often do first to try some of these treatments and to know whether or not it makes things better. And then ultimately, the last stage is the clinical trials. It's doing it in people, it's doing it in a safe way, making sure that as much as we can, we do know that whatever might be tried is safe. That sometimes is based on looking at safety data for a medication used for other purposes. It might be based on the molecular or genetic therapies used for another condition, using, for instance, a vector or a delivery system, all sorts of places where we get information about safety, but to understand whether or not the treatment actually works in people, we're really going to need to try that in people who have this condition. I will say the volunteers that consent to do this, that is the study participants, you owe a debt of gratitude, whether it might be your family member or someone else in the community. They're brave pioneers. We do this all with the hope that these treatments will work, but as we go into it, we don't know. And so these are really individuals who are dedicated not only for understanding something for themselves, but understand for the rest of the community. So it's important to recognize and appreciate those individuals who make that leap. As we do this, to realize that this takes time and to be patient. These are tough experiments. They don't happen overnight. Many of these can be done simultaneously. They don't have to be done in the stepwise series that I've said here, but many things can go on simultaneously to move the field faster. And as you're doing it, there are a lot of people who care a lot about you and your condition, but it's helping to make, like I said, it's hard. Things these days are hard for everyone, to try and make it as easy for people to do what they do well, but to work with you as a partner as you do it. As you're thinking about things, always important to respect individuals' privacy in the community. People are willing to share a lot of information, but to respect information that they might want to keep private, but to be able to aggregate that information and to share it in a de-identified way as widely as possible. Being able to leverage the investment that you're making so that you might contribute information once, but it might be helpful to potentially dozens of investigators around the world is what you want to be able to finally achieve. And as you're doing this, to realize that everyone really needs to stand up and be counted. That is, that the genetic variants in the KCNH1 gene are oftentimes unique to the individual. And if you don't do your part, no one can represent that particular variant but you. And so it really takes the whole community banding together, working together to make sure that you can help each other in moving this forward. So look forward to doing anything I can personally in terms of advancing this. We've got a great group assembled here today, and I know this is the beginning of something exciting.